Well, next with us to talk about the last year is Chris Robertshaw, Douglas East. And Chris, it was quite interesting last time. I looked back on the interview.
I didn't. I should have done.
Well, obviously, because I mean, you're an old hand anyway, but you were certainly
yeah.
talking about the latest, the new guard, the new where it's going. You weren't over impressed, at least. You didn't take any positions. You made that very clear. What's happened in the last year? You're on various things, but you're not in any departments, are you?
Well, no, I never have been a departmental member right from the get-go, and you know how strongly my views are about that. I've got huge reservations about it. Over the year, though, I seem to have been collecting memberships of policy review committees. I'm on the Environment and Infrastructure Policy Review Committee. I'm chair of the Economic Policy Review Committee. I got Tynwald to approve the setting up of a Constitutional, Legal and Justice Policy Review Committee. The huge workload in there. And as a consequence of being chair of Economic Policy Review Committee, I'm now on the Public Accounts Committee. And I think actually there's never a member's never been on all the standing committees before. It's a new thing really. The one I'm not on is the Social Affairs Policy Review Committee, but obviously with my background as Minister of Social Care, I've got a fairly good understanding of that, and also I'm on Sir Jonathan Michael's advisory panel for his big health review.
Does this give you an uplift in salary, or you not?
I think I'm
doing all this, but you're the only one that's on a basic salary. Then,
yes, that's right. I don't mind. I really don't mind. I could get more by being on a department, but I simply don't believe in it.
Okay, well, that's you've gone into that.
Well, what I do like though is that because I'm on all these review committees, I get a really broad view of government right across, and I would encourage other members to pursue a policy of being more involved with the policy review committees, because it would give them also a broader breadth of view as to what government's doing as a whole, and how so often there's interaction between one area and another that perhaps could be recognised more.
So take me through last year. What are you happy with? What you've achieved?
Well, I'm not so sure I've achieved. I mean, I was on two select committees. I chaired one on the financing of infrastructure schemes and projects, which I asked Tynwald to set up. And that was looking at financing in a different way, particularly with government being able to apply covenants. In other words, where there is a need in the future for government to engage in significant developments, it doesn't have to keep dipping into its reducing reserves in order to do that. There are very big opportunities for government to find other ways of financing things, and that report came to Tynwald in the Select Committee report on that subject came to Tynwald in July, and as far as I know it was also the first Select Committee that didn't have a series of particular recommendations that had to be voted on. It was actually intended to, and was received as by Tynwald, as an advisory document which I hope people dip in and out of. And overall it was well received. I very much enjoyed working with Bill Shimmons on the Brownfield Site Select Committee. That was quite an intense affair over a short number of months. Very positive interaction with a lot of people who had pretty strong views about it. That report went to Tynwald also in July, but it doesn't actually get dealt with and voted upon and its recommendations until November, as I recall. Legislatively, I think the big one obviously was the abortion bill. Difficult subject.
You waded in on that one, didn't you?
Oh, I did. I put a lot of effort into that. I think what disappointed me,
because you wanted to go to committees, yes? You would.
Pardon?
You wanted to go to committees?
I wanted to go to Select Committee.
Yeah.
In the end, the House of Keys didn't want to do that. I think that was wrong. And I think the record shows that was the wrong mistake, the wrong thing to do. It was a mistake because in the end we spent a long time on and used a different mechanism called the Committee of the House, which a number of members felt was the right way forward. It was helpful, but it wasn't sufficient. And I think, looking back now, there's a couple of points I'd want to make. The first is that I think it was unfortunate that in the social media world there seemed to be two extremes, where there was one party vehemently against, shall we say, giving any rights to the unborn child, and on the other side there were those who were doing their best to protect the unborn child, but perhaps not being sensitive enough to the rights of the pregnant woman.
Did you feel that heat yourself? Because
no,
delaying tactics. It looks as
it wasn't. It was never delaying.
But
tactics.
people saw it. A lot of people
well, yes,
perceived
it
as
was
that.
interpreted as that, and it never was. And interestingly, the area that I remained uncomfortable about right to the end was the I'm going to a bit of detail here, but the definition of health within the bill. It's interesting that the argument I pretty consistently put forward, that we hadn't got the right definition of health, was not accepted by the House of Keys. When Legco picked it up, and Legco, it's not for me to speak on their behalf at all, but if I was to interpret in broad terms their view, they were, broadly speaking, very supportive of the bill, and yet they took the same view as I did, as I understand it, with regard to the interpretation of health. And so Legco actually has interpreted an element of the bill, shall we say, in a more detailed way than did the House of Keys. And I think that's a salutary lesson for the House of Keys when it's looking at legislation, that it doesn't follow social media simplicity, but really drills into things. I think we had a select committee, we would have never had the problem over the definition of health, but that's a personal view. Where we've ended up with is, I think, reasonably close to where we should get.
Oh, okay.
Where the abortion laws were really out of date, needed to be updated, but they needed to be looked at in great detail. And I think there was an effort to try and go too far the other way. And I think over the process of the reading the bill, both in Keys and Legco, we've come back somewhat, and we're getting closer to where we should be.
So you'll be happy with how it's standing? 'Cause I mean, it's still
not happy, but not as uncomfortable as I was. There was a huge need to change, and thank goodness we did that.
Okay.
Or we are doing that.
And anything else that, taking your note this year?
Oh well, of course. One cannot have this discussion, this 2-year discussion, without mentioning the fact that we own the steam packet again. I mean, for 25 years I've been arguing that we were in the wrong place with the user agreement,
yes,
where you must recall where it was detached from the ownership, and effectively that process.
So you're a very happy man.
Oh, I was delighted. And I actually think as well that Treasury handled it very well, and I commended the Treasury Minister for the way he did it, and the detail of the presentations, the analysis that went ahead, and also the checks and balances that Treasury put in place as well to make sure that they got to the right conclusion.
You said that was the best speech you'd ever heard in Tooele, I think, from
well, yes.
Cannon, wasn't it?
It was, because, well, if you've waited 25 years, one is bound to be more than a little bit pleased.
What about the Liverpool situation, the £30 million to be spent there? You relaxed on that one?
Well, yes, we have to do it. I mean, we have to get into Liverpool. In an ideal world, we would have had an arrangement where all sorts of freight could go off and on. I think that's my only caveat on it. As I understand it, we can't do that. Vans will be able to go off and on, but not big commercial.
Unless
trucks.
an emergency or something, or when.
Well, yes, in special circumstances.
Special, whatever that would be. Okay.
That's unfortunate. But other than that, yes, I mean, it's good. We need to go to Liverpool. We must go to Liverpool.
How happy are you now as a member these days? Because you were a bit grumpy last time, I think. I mean,
it was my birthday a few days ago, and I got a birthday card off my grandson's, really releasing me into the right because of my age of being grumpy. So I'm comfortable with that. How do I stand? Where am I? Not grumpy, concerned. I think the house is beginning to mature. We're now 2 years in, but my big fear, my big worry, is really about the government's lack of strategic capacity and competence. And that fits in with many a discussion we've had over how our government functions in terms of being in silos. I'm sorry to bring it up again.
Well, you mentioned this time, you'll get a point on that one.
Yeah.
Is this a Chris Thomas area? I mean, is this a government area in general, or is it with the Chief Minister? Where's the blame you're putting on this? Is there anyone?
I'm not blaming anybody.
Well, someone said, yeah.
If people like me who so vehemently believe in sort of a unified government approach to things, enabling a greater degree of strategic competence to develop. In other words, the Council of Ministers should be supported by a higher quality of strategic advice and thinking, rather than the way things tend to work at the moment, is where everything gets dished out to departments. The chief executive of each department is a busy person. It ends up being in the hands of one of the officers, and suddenly the officer, instead of dealing with operational issues, is effectively responsible for delivering big strategic decisions, and I just don't think it works. But who's to blame? Those of us, I suppose, who haven't portrayed the huge advantages of having a much more unified government approach. I think it was interesting, and I'm sure lots of people know this already, but when we had the select committee, if you recall, in the first year I took a motion to the floor of Tynwald asking for a select committee to be set up to look at the concept of a much more unified government, and the Tynwald shied away from a select committee, but there was an understanding that was a need to look at this seriously, and through an amendment the Council of Ministers converted it into being a subcommittee of the Council of Ministers, and I was party to that with Chris Thomas and others. We produced a report which, in broad terms, defined a path towards a unified government approach. It was interesting, though, that having done that, Jersey, obviously mindful of the same issues themselves, looked at our report very much almost straight away, decided yes, they were going to adopt that approach, and with 8 months they had a unified government approach. So it's unfortunate that we've fallen behind, and I think the sad thing is too many people see the downsides or the negatives of it rather than seeing the huge advantages that it gives. We're in a very competitive world now.
You're still using this word silo then, so that's how you see it still?
Yes, because issues of great import end up being within the remit of a particular department, when in fact really there should be we really don't need chief executives of departments, we need directors of divisions, and the money we save from chief executives should migrate to the centre and give us the opportunity to have a strategic thinking body. Now, we don't have to have all the people there all the time. That body needs to identify an issue, and then call in advice and guidance from other jurisdictions, from universities, from the private sector, wherever, and the departments themselves, in order to construct really intelligent thinking about where the Isle of Man's going to go in the future. And it is a very competitive world now.
Pag was asking a question about how much time you spend on your people with Douglas East and how much on national. You didn't answer that, I know.
No, because
Did you purposely not answer it or just not get back to him?
Well, I'm not answerable to Pag on something like that, and so on principle I didn't want to answer it. But it's a movable feast. I mean, a lot of the things that I deal with, because I'm the one of the members for Douglas East, and that's the capital, you're very involved in big strategic issues, which are both constituency issues and national issues. For example, take the harbour strategy. I mean, effectively, in the main, it was about Douglas Harbour, which is in my constituency, and that was mishandled, by the way, by government. They brought forward two proposals. One was, look, this is the proposal to spend millions on the existing inner harbour to make it deeper and to underpin the existing quaysides, etc. And the other option, which they appeared at one stage to be looking at, which was reinventing a deep water harbour, they just sort of waved the hand at and pretended it was just about cruise ship berths, which it wasn't. And so they failed, and they failed because, in my humble opinion, it was driven by the officers within DOI who wanted, as quite rightly, as operational officers, to spend money on the existing facility. And yet really what we were trying to do was look at a strategic overview of our harbours for the next 100 years. Okay. And that was a perfect example, A, of where operational officers should contribute to strategy, not to be the leaders of it, but also to come back to your point about how a matter which is a big strategic issue can also be a constituency issue.
You've got to give me a number there. I mean, do you have in your head, is it 80-20, 70-30? You know,
we're back to this again.
Yeah, well, we'll just see if I can get you to give you enough, a rough idea maybe?
Well, I always give you two answers, don't I? I mean, in some respects the government's done well, and in other respects it's not moved forward.
No, I was just talking about you and your constituency work. And that
I beg your pardon.
That first, just because you didn't give me a number on that one. I'm coming to that because we're almost done, so...
Well, I'm not going to because I don't differentiate between the two.
Let's talk about the numbers then. I mean, how have you dealt? You give yourself a number out of 10 this year. I mean, you gave yourself a very low number last year because, but I wasn't sure if you're being serious about that.
What did I give myself?
3, I think you said. Yeah, I think it was 3 and 3. I may be right.
Well, I look my ante. I'll give myself 4. Wow, and I'll give.
Sounds. I mean, come on.
No, I worked hard this year on a number of areas.
Exactly. So how do you rate yourself?
But I haven't got. I failed to get the big issue over about the need to revamp government. People out there are quite understandably not interested. They want us as politicians to bang the drum over this issue or that issue. But at the end of the day, if we as politicians representing the people are going to deliver, then we have to have the right organisation to make sure that we're making that delivery. And I believe, quite honestly, that if we moved in this direction, then we would start to improve the level of trust between the electorate and government, which I think is still very, very weak.
Okay. Can you give me a government number, how the government's done?
Well, was it 3 last time?
Yeah. Well, you did 8 on this and 8 on that, but when I had to pin you to one number, and 3 was thrown in there.
That's mean pinning me to one number. But if you're going to, I think we'll allow them 5 this time because of the steam packet issue.
And how do you get on with Howard Quayle? Are you buddies? Do you have much to do with him?
Well, does it matter whether we're buddies or
not?
No,
I'm trying to get the feel about...
We're next door neighbours, I hope there's
I'm trying to get the feel of... Are you cooperative with him? Is he cooperative with you?
I hope we're mutually respectful. We have a different opinion on things in terms of where things go. I am clearly more radical.
Are you seeing as trouble still, do you think, then? I mean, do you think
trouble?
Are you the one that's always...
Ask Howard.
Yeah.
I will ask.
Well, but are you still enjoying it? Let's try that anyway.
Yes, I am. I think I've said this to you before, having come from the private sector where you agonised over issues and then delivered answers, I've always found politics incredibly slow and frustrating. But this is my last period.
Definitely.
As I've said a number of times.
Which you said before, but yeah.
And what I hope I can contribute in the remaining 3 years. I mean, the last year's is sort of a bit of a write-off because...
Well, will be if you're not electioneering.
No. People are increasingly electioneering as they get to the the focus changes. But what I'll try to contribute in the next couple of years is trying to assist those who will form the next administration, and hopefully that will move on significantly.